down and talked to Charity and Leia. Yesterday was the party for 10 years.
She sent me the video.
Okay, good. Yeah, a lot of good things to say about you.
Yeah, that was so special for them coming up to visit and everything.
I've never heard the whole, not that there's a whole lot to tell from your perspective. I've never heard the whole story of her birth or anything. But it was pretty neat. Neat to be there 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, she brought me one of the books the book that she had written. Did they say anything about that?
They had pictures of it and things like that, but I mean, Charity works with Gency, so they're pretty good. They work with the same family, so they're pretty close. And then they had family and things. So I mean, I think a lot of people knew about stuff that I didn't know about necessarily, because why would they stop to say, and for you, let me explain this.
And I must admit, I've been taking care of a lot of babies over the past 13 years. So I had forgotten the story. And then when she started saying things and stuff started coming back.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, they were, I think she showed the video, right? So she said that, in hindsight, the bluntness is what you need. Which is funny, it's what I've said all these years when Gency, was having seizures when she was pregnant. We had a Bangladeshi neuro, whatever, no bedside, manner. It was like, here are your options, this, and they're all bad. He's like, which would you like? I'm like, what? Tell me which one I should do. And he's like, this, or this. Here are all the problems with all of them. Take your pick. But I mean, that's what you want. It's just the facts, You don't want to be coddled. In the moment, you do. But then they were also, she also said the fact that she went back in on the last try, got it done. It was emotional. It was good. All right. Let's see. Let's watch a movie.
When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. When they opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent of it. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." Then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. Crispus, the synagogue leader, and his entire household believed in the Lord, and many of the Corinthians who heard Paul believed and were baptized. One night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. "Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking, and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in this city." So Paul stayed in Corinth for a year and a half, teaching them the Word of God. Acts 18, 5-11. The church here in ancient Corinth continued to grow, and it included all segments of society, including government officials, wealthy businessmen, freedmen, and the poor. Now, one of the first Christians was the city treasurer named Erastus, who is remembered in this official Latin inscription from about 50 AD. This slab of pavement was discovered near the Corinthian theater, and it translates to Erastus, in return for his aedileship, laid the pavement at his own expense. In their biblical accounts, Luke and Paul refer to Erastus as the manager of the city, or the treasurer of Corinth. In Latin, this title is known as the aedile, a city official chosen annually to manage public works and commercial affairs. Once again, we see something carved in stone that is evidence of what we have in our Bibles. Of course, there were many Jews who rejected the message of Jesus preached by Paul. Like in other cities, they eventually got fed up with the visiting evangelist and looked for a way to stop him. Here in Corinth, they eventually brought Paul before the Roman proconsul at the judgment seat here in the Forum, known as the Bema. When Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews of Corinth made a united attack on Paul and brought him to the place of judgment. This man, they charged, is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to them, "If you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names and your own law, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of these things." So he drove them off. Acts 18:12 through 16. The Bema in Corinth has been discovered here. It's a platform on the south side of the Forum. An inscription has been uncovered near the platform, confirming its official use. Now, as you can see, the platform rises about 7.5 feet above the pavement of the Forum where the accused and onlookers stood. It was from here that the proconsul would address citizens, settle disputes, and render verdicts in criminal cases. When Paul was living in Corinth, Jewish leaders from the synagogue brought him before Junius Gallio, the proconsul of the province. Jewish leaders hoped that Paul would be punished and barred from teaching Christianity. According to Roman historians such as Tacitus, we know that Gallio served a short term as proconsul of Achaia from around 51 to 52 AD. And remarkably, a stone inscription has been discovered, also stating that Junius Gallio was the proconsul of the province of Achaia in 52 AD. The level of accuracy found in the Bible was confirmed yet again. New discoveries are made often, and it never ceases to amaze me. You can put your trust in the history of the Bible.
All right. All right, so predictably, after that, we are in Corinth, or we'll get to Corinth here, from Athens, get Paul to Corinth from Athens, where Scott talked about him last week. Continuing this theme that we keep coming back to. Paul's going to places that are new to him in a lot of ways. I mean, he's getting pretty good, I think, at probably being a foreigner in different cultures. He's been doing it for a while now. But he's taken the gospel of Jesus to places where it hasn't been yet. And so we see the reactions of the pagans. We see the reactions of the Jews to the message of the gospel. And it's continually, this interesting story because we have different reactions at different places to it. And we'll see here again kind of a different outcome to, or a different reaction to the gospel as it's going to the ends of the earth. So we're still in Greece. Whoops. Sorry, we're not doing an interlude in the First Thessalonians today. All right, so we're on Paul's second journey, of course, and we've traced his path all the way around to Athens, and now he's coming over to Corinth. And from Corinth, he'll go to Ephesus and then back home. I'm going to call it that. So it's been a significantly longer journey here than what his first missionary journey was. And if we think about where he's been, just in Greece, so after he crosses over from what's now Turkey into Greece, and the time that he's spending in each place, and we don't know exactly, but if you take the shortest amount of time, 7.5 months that he has spent so far actually in certain cities, to about a little over a year that he may have spent in the city. So somewhere between that he's actually spent in these places. Had some time for travel and things like that. And we get the sense that he's actually covering quite a lot of ground for what he's doing. So in roughly a year so far, very roughly, he's taken the gospel to a good number of places and made relationships with some of these places. The churches in Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea, I mean, he loves these people. And Philippi sends him money. The Thessalonians, we read his letters to them, and I mean, he pours over how much he feels for them and how much he loves them, his family, and things like that. But, violence was part of all those first few cities. Of course, in Philippi, he's really beaten. And then he gets out of Thessalonica and Berea because the mob's coming for him. And so he can hightail it out of there just in time. And he gets to Athens. And of course, again, we know how much he cares about these other churches that he's established, right? Because he sends Silas and Timothy back to them. It's like, check on them, see how they're doing, minister to them, all that kind of good stuff. So he's in Athens, and Scott covered that last week. And again, it was kind of different, right? There wasn't a mob scene. He wasn't beaten or anything, but there was a lot of just kind of, take it or leave it reaction. I mean, we record a small number of converts, and then he moves on. We don't really have much more of the story than that. Was it the real kind of nonchalant reaction to his message that causes him to move on? I mean, why couldn't he have stuck around for a while longer? Was there, we can speculate about a lot of things. And so he goes then from Athens to Corinth, and it's kind of interesting, right? He's alone at this point. Silas and Timothy are back there. And one of the things that, I kind of forget about, because some of these things, are mentioned in like half a verse and then never mentioned again. When he's publicly beaten and jailed, with his ankles shackled in Philippi. I mean, that wasn't just some little, minor, spank your kid just, once in a while just to get him to go in the right direction. I mean, he was beat. And we're not talking about that much time that has elapsed. I mean, he still, perhaps, is, really feeling the injuries that he sustained months ago. Now, maybe not. Maybe he's, physically, maybe he's a fast healer. Maybe the Holy Spirit was like, all right, you've had enough of this. Who knows? But when he writes to the Corinthian church, he reminds them, so when I came to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech and wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. And so you get the idea that, Paul alone, coming from Athens over to Corinth, it's kind of depressing, right? I mean, he's had the Macedonian, right? He sees the Macedonian call, right? Come over and, preach to us. And he does. And he's had some successes. I mean, there are churches established, there are converts. But man, he's paid a high price physically for this, right? And emotionally at this point.
It's a bit of PTSD language.
Yeah, really. Which, would make sense. I mean, he was beat severely and left for dead, and perhaps did die on his first missionary journey. And then he's beat severely here in Philippi during his second missionary journey. And again, just, we sometimes, I think, see Paul, as this, in some of his letters, he's so confident and very powerful in a lot of what he says. Very certain of a lot of what he says. You can almost see him as this kind of, real kind of alpha dog, like, all right, here's the way it is. You're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this right, fix this. But at other times, this was a person, right? I forgot to put that slide. Real people, real events, real history, right? I mean, he was just a regular guy. Exceptional in many ways, obviously, and he's being led by the Holy Spirit in ways that truly are special. But it's just a man, and here he is, lonely and physically worn down, and didn't get the kind of reaction in Athens that you're hoping for. I think any of us might be going to the next place in weakness and fear and much trembling. I mean, that really, who's on his tail this time, in his mind, even if the Jews aren't getting a mob together, to chase him out of town or beat him or something like that. It really is, just a little glimpse, right, of the real person who's actually doing all of this. Another good example of how Acts and the epistles talk to each other also, right? Greg will get into the letters to the Corinthians here in the next couple of weeks. All right, so Corinth itself, you can see it there. It's an isthmus, which is one of those great words that's really impossible to say, but if I've read it once, I've read it 1,000 times, the past couple of weeks getting ready for this. So all the roads going from this part of Greece to this part of Greece go through Corinth, and you have ships coming from both sides. There was not a canal. In fact, several different Roman emperors wanted to build a canal and weren't able to get it done. And that actually they have a canal now, and even now it's not what they wanted it to be, because getting through those rocks is just impossible. So several times throughout history, over centuries, people have wanted to kind of do a Panama Canal kind of thing here, and they've never quite got it done. Though it can handle like smaller size ships at this point. But what they did have across it was more or less, those. I've never done it because it seems like it would be death. But when you put a log in the water and you got to run on it to balance on it? I don't know if that's ever happened, but it seems like it's in lots of movies and cartoons. They basically had a road of logs, and they would get ships, in a little holder like they give you with tacos, at the Mexican place. They put the ship on that, and then you would have slaves hauling your ship for about 3 or 4 miles across land to the other side. So you didn't have to sail all the way around it. There were limits on that too. I mean, you get a big ship completely laden down with, goods made, They couldn't move anything, but they actually had that at the time, which is kind of crazy to think about. But all that to say, you've got 2 ports, and port cities are port cities, right? Looking for fun. You got roads converging here, so Corinth was a happening place. Lots of people coming through here, lots of money, trade, commerce, all the stuff from just being an important city. It was the capital city of that part of Greece. So it's a very large, metropolis. This is a recreation. It doesn't still look like that. Lots of Latin and Greek spoken. It's a Roman city now, but lots of languages would have been heard there because you had lots of travelers coming there for, it's a commercial hub and a governmental hub of the area. And so everything that would go along with that, all the services and businesses and brothels and things like that at the time that would serve those port cities did. You have big temples to Apollo. This is the temple to Apollo there. And Aphrodite and her temple, if you see that rock up on that top corner, I'll have another picture of it. That's where Aphrodite's temple was. And of course, temples to the Greeks, or the Roman emperors, Had Jews there, plenty of Jews. It was a big place. You had lots and lots of slaves. As many as perhaps 1/3 of the entire population was made up of slaves, which kind of makes sense because it was a big city and there were a lot of slaves, but it was also where slave traders went. It was kind of a hub for the trading of slaves and the selling of slaves and shipping them from east to west and things like that, to slaves going to Rome in large part, but everywhere else to the west. So it's a happening place. It was famous for its prostitutes and brothels and things like that. But again, it's a port city with 2 ports. So there you go. It had been destroyed actually not too long before this time by the Romans, a couple hundred years ago, and then they rebuilt it. One of the authors I read about described it as a boom town, right? This is a place to go to make money. It's a place to go for opportunity. It's a place to go for fun. It's a place to go for, if you're one of these sailors coming into port, have a ball there in Corinth. And as far as opportunities for work, we'll read about Aquila and Priscilla, who, when they are kicked out of Rome, where do they go? They go to Corinth, where probably a lot of people went to find work. Writer named Suetonius, a very important writer because he writes the history of a lot of the emperors. He mentions this, says, as the Jews were making constant disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, he expelled them, the Emperor Claudius, from Rome. And this is why we're told in Acts that Aquila and Priscilla leave Rome. Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And we have another source from the era that talks about that. There is, I guess you call it speculation forever, until they find some dude named Christus, some Jew who is, getting the Jews to make trouble. Most people kind of think this is a reference to Christ. Of course, not Christ in body, he was dead by now. But the Jews in Rome were causing trouble because of some dude named Christus, some dude named Christ. And so the idea is that, these were Christians in Rome. That Christianity had made its way to Rome. And the name of Christ, not Christ himself, but Christ followers among the Jews, as we have seen with Paul, Christ followers among the Jews in Rome were kind of stirring up trouble. I mean, not trying to stir up trouble, but just saying, hey, Jesus, he fulfilled our Old Testament, all this. And so the Jews were kind of in turmoil amongst themselves, and Claudius gets sick of it. Nowhere in the Roman Empire did they like rebellion and revolts or any kind of trouble like that, especially among religious or ethnic minorities. And so if the Jews were having a bunch of conflict among themselves in Rome, of all places, being like, all right, just get out of here. We don't know that. There may have been some Jewish dude named Chrestus who just happened to have a name close to Christ who liked to stir up the Jews. But it's a very interesting kind of piece of evidence to talk about the spread of the gospel at the time that, Paul's not the only one working at this time to spread the gospel. But again, it kind of verifies what we're told in Acts about Priscilla and Aquila. Corinth had more or less the Olympic Games. They were called the Isthmian Games because it's on an isthmus. Every year before and after the Olympics in Rome, they would have it. Or in Athens, where the regular Olympics were, so the year before, you'd have Corinth, Athens, Corinth. And there's actually another place that had games on that other year. It was dedicated to Poseidon, not surprising, wrestling, boxing, racing, horse racing. This is popular, just like the Olympics were in Athens. So again, another reason that a lot of visitors would show up in Corinth, in this case just once every 2 years. But still, it speaks to the importance and the size of Corinth. It was a big place where you'd have your games, right? I mean, it's that kind of place. They were the first Greek city to have gladiatorial games with gladiators. That was not part of the Olympic kind of games. But again, just talking about Corinth and kind of its relevance. Do you know why those games ended in about the 400s AD? Because Christians took over. When Christians gained control of the Roman Empire, it became Constantine, all that kind of good stuff. The Christians didn't much care for things done in honor of gods like Poseidon. So we love the Olympics now. We love sports, right? The Christians are the ones that got rid of the games at the time. Not for bad reasons. Just kind of interesting. Again, from 1 Corinthians, this is Paul writing back to the, not long after this, but writing to this church. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. I don't run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air. Boxing and foot races were both part of these games. But I discipline my body and keep it under control. Blah, blah, blah. And so again, really interesting, right? Paul's writing to the Corinth church about something they would be very familiar with, right? People of Corinth knew the games. Paul's there a year and a half. So, if he didn't see the games, if he didn't witness them, he at least certainly knew about it. And he's fairly well-traveled and well-educated, so he would have known about it anyway. It's just, again, really interesting to think, and of course a lot of people have, read that verse numerous times over the years, but a real life relevance to the Corinthians themselves, because of course this would be, as far as sport in the ancient world goes, Corinth is one of the main places for it, right? So this is any preacher on a given Sunday, making a football reference to a church in the South and just knowing that everybody knows exactly what he's talking about, right? I mean, this is Paul doing the same thing. The wreaths were what they received, the little trophies. It's also famous for its prostitutes and its brothels and its religious ritual prostitution because of that temple to Aphrodite. Aphrodite, she's the goddess of what? Love, mighty Aphrodite, right? So if you're the goddess of love, you probably got, a lot of temple prostitutes and things. I mean, the ones that weren't the goddesses of love had temple prostitutes, so Aphrodite certainly up to that game. Slang in the Greek Mediterranean world equated Corinth with prostitution. If you call someone a Corinthian girl, you're calling her a prostitute, or referring to actual prostitutes somewhere else as Corinthian girls. If you're in another city, that's where the Corinthian girls are. Obviously, it was a different language. You'd be talking about where the prostitutes were, and you could, to Corinthianize or to be of Corinth or something like that meant fornication, normally with prostitutes, something like that. So, I mean, Corinth had that reputation for centuries leading up and including the time when Paul was there. And it had this temple to Aphrodite that had probably, so this is kind of religious ritual sex. You're celebrating. So this is the world that Paul's taking the gospel into, right? So, it's still wrong, but this is their world, and there was no reason for them not to kind of worship this way. But how do you honor the goddess of love? Well, sex, right? And so that was part of it. And there are plenty of other brothels within the city. So it's up on that hill up there is where Aphrodite's temple was. There's not much of it left now. But another ancient writer, it's about a half century, more or less, before Paul was there, writing about this place. Is the temple, Strabo is the name. The temple of Aphrodite was so rich that it owned more than 1,000 temple slaves, courtesans, whom both men and women had dedicated to the goddess. And therefore it was also on account of these women that the city was crowded with people and grew rich. For instance, the ship captains freely squandered their money, and hence the proverb, not for every man is the voyage to Corinth. You're one of poor. Have to go visit all the prostitutes there. Again, this is an account from way back when. Did he count heads and get to 1,000? Probably not. But it's evidence of Corinth's reputation and certainly of, some of the stuff that was going on there. It's strange for us to even imagine something like that. I can't. I mean, obviously we have sex and things like that all around us and movies and plenty of people have no qualms with, sex, whatever, whatever, wherever, whoever, whatever, but as part of religious ritual, standard part of honoring the gods. And this was not just in Corinth. Corinth just was a real hub for it because it had a temple to Aphrodite. And it's into that world. There's a temple to Apollo, and then up on that hill was the temple to Aphrodite. So you could get all the prostitutes you wanted down here, but again, you're worshiping, you're honoring a goddess that you're supposed to worship because Aphrodite's pretty powerful. You're honoring her when you go have sex with the temple slaves up there. Again, this is Paul writing back to the Corinthian church. A passage that a lot of us have heard many times. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. Do not know that your bodies are members of Christ. Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never. We understand the meaning of this, of course. The Corinthians, prostitution was, not, here he calls it sexual immorality twice. Just that phrase, just saying that's immoral, is something that the, new converts in Corinth, the pagan converts, Jews would have already had this attitude towards adultery and sex. But, these new pagans, just the idea that it's wrong. That right there is like a new concept, So for us, that's kind of a given for a lot of us, where if you're raised going to church and things like that. But I mean, this is Paul, really trying to establish new values, new norms for these populations, right? Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you? He's talking about sex. Where a lot of these people having sex at the temple to Aphrodite, right? So here's Paul just completely upending the way they see the world and religion, or the way they kind of understand it to be in their culture. It's like your body is that temple. And sex like that is immoral. It's just, again, it's a radical message that Paul's taking to this place. We've talked about some of the craziness, the idea of worshiping just one God, is crazy. And here we have a city for centuries stereotyped as being this oversexed hub for prostitution and things like that. And this is what Paul is telling them. Again, it makes sense to us. It's relevant to us, 100% relevant to us. But to really understand exactly when and where this was written and how that body of believers in Corinth would, have to come to terms with this, right? I mean, if you're a new convert, the old ways are gone, but this was a standard something. So I mean, it's the practice of it, the enjoyment of it, the religious kind of importance of it. So not just that it was kind of neutral, but it was actually celebrated. You're supposed to be doing this to honor the goddess Aphrodite. Probably a great church outreach program. Elders, if you really want to grow your numbers, hey everyone, sex is required. And all of a sudden you have Paul saying, do the complete opposite. So again, just radical way that Christianity is taking the Roman world and the values of the time and just completely flipping them around. And we think about, a third of the population of Corinth, slaves, a lot of them would have been slaves involved in the sex, trade. And nowadays, if you say sex slavery, I mean, we got government armed forces descending on people, I hope. We all hope that, right? But that's not, I mean, that was just, slavery was the norm. Sex with slaves was allowed. I mean, if it was your slave, I couldn't necessarily have sex with your slave. I could get in trouble for that, but not because of the sex or the slave, but because it was your property that I messed with. Just like if I did something to your house or your horse. And so think of all the women involved in this, all the slaves, men and women involved in the sex trade, a major source of money, commerce in a lot of these places, especially in Corinth. And here comes the message of the gospel that all of a sudden, considers those people that are being used and not even. It wasn't even wrong in that mindset to use people in that way, right? They were slaves. You could do whatever you want to a slave. They had no rights. Women had no rights. Now, if you were an aristocratic woman, obviously you had some protections. But women had no. And here comes Christianity to protect those people and to change the entire mindset that abuses those people. It's really amazing. There's good grief, I forget her name. Anyway, Louise Perry. She's written a lot about kind of paganism in the ancient world and things like that. But I think I mentioned this before. When you find a brothel in the ancient world, because you find a large number of male babies who were killed when they were born. Left. The brothels had little places where they would just dump the bodies of male babies. Because their prostitutes would get pregnant, of course, and what good is a male kid? You have a female kid, she goes right back into the, wait till she's old enough, and she becomes part of the trade, part of your business. Male babies are just drains on, you got to raise them, you got to feed them, And so there are tons and tons. That's how you know you find a brothel in the ancient world, when you find lots of skeletons of baby boys. Which is strange, because we always think that boys are more, and they were, obviously, more celebrated than a baby girl, if you were not in the prostitution game. There are plenty of male prostitutes also, but it's just, it's just, you read that and you think, oh, that's horrible, right? That's what Christianity is upending, is that kind of practice. And again, a practice that wasn't seen as being wrong. It was normal to them. Paul's just really, really taking it to in ways that it's hard for us to appreciate just how radical some of this is. All right, another thing that we need to think about. We're getting to the point now where we have Galatians that we've talked about. We've talked about Second Thessalonians. We'll talk about Corinthians. So we're starting to have all of a sudden a lot of Paul's input on more religious practice and some doctrinal issues and things like that. And what we've had now is just kind of what we get in Acts. And at this point, we've had one very long sermon, very good sermon on his first missionary trip in Pisidian Antioch to Jews. It's at a synagogue. And then we have what Scott covered last week in Athens at the Areopagus to pagans. Although they're more atheist pagans, but pagans in that they're not Jewish. And then we have a couple verses in Lystra where they think that he's a god. They think, they try to worship him, and he's like, no, don't do that. And that's similar to the Areopagus, what he says. And those are the sermons we get. The rest of it is, and he went and he preaches and he argues whatever at the synagogue, and then he went to the Gentiles. And we don't really get much of what he says at all, except a few times in these first couple of missionary journeys. And so we got to use that, right? Extrapolate when he's speaking and reasoning with the Jews or the God-fearers, the non-Jews that are worshiping with Jews, and we keep seeing those all over the place. Can we assume that he's probably preaching in similar fashion to what he preached at Pisidian Antioch, because that was to Jews. And so he starts with the Old Testament. We worked our way through it. It's the whole story of the Old Testament, up into exile and hope of redemption and things like that. And Jesus is the one who fulfills all of this. From Abraham, Isaac, and through David, and the prophets, because Jews know that. What Scott talked about last week at the Areopagus, he's coming at this from a very different angle. It's more an argument from philosophy, right? It's not an argument from the Old Testament to the pagans, because that doesn't mean as much to them, right? And so, we do have some places, Philippi being one, there wasn't a synagogue there. He meets Jews. Perga was a big city he gets to. He doesn't mention a synagogue there, which is strange. It was a big city, so you'd think it would have one. We just don't know. But when he talks to these Gentiles, when he leaves the synagogues in all these cities, and then, fine, I'm going to go talk to the Gentiles. It's what he was saying there at the Areopagus. Similar to the message he's delivering. Different audiences, different message. And again, we have I become all things to all people, right? Of course, that's talking about how he lives his life also, but we get the sense of the Paul's ability to do just this, to change the message depending on who he's trying to reach, right? All for the sake of the gospel. And so it's really kind of interesting to think about as he's going to different populations. We have a few kind of sermons that he gives. And we can use those. Okay, he probably is saying the same kind of thing to that group that he said to whichever group we're talking about. It's just kind of interesting, to try to put this together, because we don't get a lot of what he just says in a lot of these lessons. And again, that's starting to change. So we're starting to get now chronologically to the point where he's writing letters, and so more and more of. And so we know more of what he said. He obviously was saying things back then, but it's kind of up to us to. Oh, there we go. Well, okay. Let's start there. All right, let's read. We'll start with you on the front row, since you love it so much. Let's work our way that way.
After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them.
And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks.
He's having reasoned in the synagogue. Assume he said what he said in Pisidian Antioch, right? At the synagogue.
And Silas and Timothy arrived in Macedonia. Paul was occupied with the Lord, testifying to the Jews that Christ was Jesus. And when they opposed and reviled him, he shook out his garment and said to them, "Blood be upon your own heads. I am innocent. From now on I will go to the Gentiles."
And he left there and went to the house of a man named Titus Justus, a worshiper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord, together with his entire household, and many of the Corinthians, hearing Paul, believed and were baptized.
And the Lord said to Paul one night in the vision, "Do not be afraid, but go on speaking, and do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people." And he stayed a year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them.
But when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal, saying, "This man is persuading the people to worship God contrary to the law." But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrongdoing or vicious crime, O Jews, I would have to reason to accept your complaint."
But since it is a matter of questions about words and names in your own law, see it to yourselves. I refuse to be a judge of these things. He drove them from the tribune. They all seized Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the tribunal. Gallio paid no attention to any of this.
All right. What grabbed your attention for that? Relatively short passage.
Well, they beat the leader of the synagogue.
Beat Sosthenes, or Sosthenes.
Yes, they call him.
There are some people who think Sosthenes is the Crispus mentioned in First Corinthians as someone that Paul baptized, but other people don't agree with that. And if that's the case, then this is the only mention we ever get of Sosthenes. Perhaps he is someone that Paul talks about converting in one of the Corinthians letters, but that's not necessarily the case. It might be.
It's really surprising he's only 17 verses to cover his 18 months in Corinth and two massive letters of verses.
A year and a half.
Was it assumed that he was converted at that point when they, is that why they seized him?
Do you want to assume this? You can assume whatever you like.
You're embarrassed to see us, we're gonna take it out on you.
Yeah, this should be, these are the Jews. It's the Jews that bring this case against Paul. And so we're assuming it's the Jews. I mean, it is the Jews, according to the text, who beat Sosthenes. So are they mad at him because how he presents the case to Gallio, and Gallio doesn't even listen to it? Are they mad at him because he is a convert? Because he allowed Paul to speak at the synagogue and start all this trouble in the first place? Assume what you want. This is what we're told. We're told they beat him. Again, that's what we know. We also know that Gallio didn't really care that they beat him.
I thought about this just as we're talking about Psalm 23 in our sermons. He was nervous, he was scared, and then in verse 9 and 10, Jesus says to the Lord, spoke to him in visions, and do not be afraid,
Yeah.
keep on speaking, don't be silent, for I am with you. And Psalm 23, David talks about, even walk the valley of death, I will not fear, for you are with me. I just noticed that connection of
Which the valley of shadow of the death, I mean, Paul's walked that. Yeah, I mean, he stays a year and 6 months, we're told, after God tells him, hey, you're going to be all right here. Like, I got people here. I have many men in this city who are I have many in this city who are my people.
It's interesting too, what it's saying.
Yeah, right. I mean, you want to think it means Jews, but they're the ones that bring the case against him. But I mean, this would make sense when God's saying, I have people here. But who knows, maybe just saying people who are open to it, people who will
Take him in.
yeah, I mean,
Why he was able to stay so.
yeah, I mean, he finds Priscilla and Aquila, who are also tent makers, which is a whole other. Paul was not raised to be a tent maker. Paul was a privileged, well-educated, Jew, member, this guy's important. He was not born into a world of tent making. Like he picks up that trade at some point. I know that's speculation about why, but probably because of who he wants to be to all these people he's taking the gospel to. But anyway, yeah, I mean, after being chased away, after weeks, months, not many months, from the places that he has recently been, and I know his first missionary trip, he doesn't stay anywhere near this long. He just kind of makes a swing through Turkey. This has got to be encouraging, right? This has got to be exactly what TJ and Danny have been preaching about. It's like, yeah, at times when you are at your lowest, I'll be right there for you. And so just that little bit of kind of promise. And that also, when they bring the case against him, I think Paul has that in mind. I think Paul remembers that God told him that. I bet he did. I bet he's like, oh, great, I'm being hauled in front of somebody else again. And this is a trial. Last week, at the Areopagus, another one of those contradictions I love. Who is it? Michael Heiser, who I really like. We use him a lot, right? He talks about how the Areopagus in Athens, it's definitely not a trial. This is where philosophers go to debate. N.T. Wright, his biography, I've been using some for this. His biography of Paul talks about how it definitely at the Areopagus was a trial, 100%. That's why they were there. I'm like, I got two guys I like. I like N.T. Wright. I like Michael Heiser. And they're both telling me different things about why Paul was brought there in Athens. This definitely was a trial. We don't have to guess. And yet Gallio talk about a faith-building moment, right? I mean, as if Paul doesn't already have faith. But, remembering God told him that, and then Gallio just says, I'm not worried about this. Paul's like, man, God actually means what he says. It's really, really fascinating. The little video mentioned this. We have, lots of confidence about the time frame of a lot of what Paul is talking about and experiencing. Here, Gallio was very well connected. His brother was Seneca, a very important politician, philosopher, writer. In fact, Gallio commits suicide when his brother is forced to commit suicide because they kind of fall out of political favor after this. But yeah, Claudius, on this piece of rock right here, talks about how Gallio is a friend of the emperor, and it's telling Gallio, giving him some instructions about how to get people to move to Delphi, which we've talked about before. This man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law. What are the Jews accusing him of? They're talking to Gallio, so presumably this is contrary to Roman law. Gallio doesn't listen to any of it. He doesn't care.
Gallio didn't respond as if it was one of the law. He responded as if they were referring to it.
Yeah. And maybe he's heard, maybe someone whispers in, it's like, hey, not too long ago, this dude just talked for like 3 hours in Athens. Like, get out of this. Like, we got dinner plans. He sees it as a purely Jewish thing. Here's a passage from that N.T. Wright. Gallio's thinking they're talking about within the Jewish religious text, which again makes sense. Remember that idea that this guy named Chrestus is stirring up trouble in Rome. The kind of confusing, not really understanding who this Christ figure is if you're these Roman rulers. Well, the important thing here that Wright points out, What it meant was that unlike the authorities in the other territories he had visited, the official Roman governor, a very well-connected official Roman governor of southern Greece, big city, had declared that being a Jesus follower was to be seen as a variation of the Jewish way of life. And a stroke, this drew the sting that had been part of the pain in Galatia. It meant, among other things, that when non-Jewish Jesus followers, so Gentile Jesus followers, absented themselves from the civic cult, so not giving, honor and alms and things like that, at like the temples to the Roman emperors and whatnot, and Aphrodite, they would be able to claim the same exemption as their Jewish neighbors, right? We've talked about it. Jews had always had this, at times uneasy, at times pretty normal relationship with Rome about being allowed to worship their God and not other gods. And, different Roman rulers kind of enforced that more strictly than others and made them do some things. Like, okay, you got to pray for the emperor, you got to, whatever. But now all of a sudden, we've got a pretty high official in the Roman government saying, the Jesus followers of the Jews of Jesus followers, I don't even care. There's no difference in my mind. And so now all of a sudden, the Jews who have always been able to say, we're Jews, we kind of have this special little rule about worship. Gallio is lumping the Christians in with Gentile Christians in with that sect of the Jews. So really kind of pretty big political ramifications to that, just because of how Gallio kind of commented on that. Perhaps the mob violence against Paul, would that maybe have influenced Gallio? But Luke does not write anything about it, but if Paul just mentioned, hey, I'm a Roman citizen, does all of a sudden Gallio see the mob and say, hey, we're not having any of this? Is that part of this decision? We don't know. We don't know at all. Is Gallio just trying to appease one people or another? He lets them beat up Sosthenes. Like, I don't care about this guy. And again, maybe that is Gallio kind of getting the vibes. Like, these people want to beat someone. Like, they're mad. Don't give them Sosthenes. I mean, he doesn't pick him. But they're the political games that Gallio is playing. He's a high-ranking official. He's playing politics in some way. Anyway, all right, we're out of time. I think Greg next week will start into the Corinthian letters, so that'll be kind of fun. All right, thanks. See you next week.
So last, almost a year ago now, and they have a bridge over that. There's a place where you can park and get refreshments and stuff. So I'm out there on that bridge and taking pictures, and there's a lot of people coming to go. And I'm walking back, and I look up and there's Frank McNeese. And I'm like, he was on another trip, another group. And so we, it's like, that was wild. And then we go to where what's that raised platform called?
Yeah.
We've been trying to find. So then we're at that place, and John Moore just told us all about what had happened in that area and everything was crazy. And I look up and there's Frank. And I said, man, isn't it cool, like, thinking about what happened here and everything else? What happened? Because he was on a
different tour.
He was in a tour that was not spiritually focused at all. And so I was like, okay, I'll try to explain.
One time, when I was over in the students one time, I was going down an escalator, or I was going up an escalator, at rush hour, London subway. One of my undergraduate professors from Luke was going down the side. We called each other's eye. And there's so many people, I guess he was doing something, I was doing something, like, hey! The weirdest encounter.
Yeah, I think I ordered the Christian blend on. seen before.
Oh, me too.